of the Deborah's Voice Talk Show, and we are excited to come back to you again on this Wednesday. Listen, this month we've been talking over and over about a wonderful topic, which is relationships and intimacy and marriage. And so I talked to you last week about intimacy, and we got so much feedback from that broadcast. Today, I want to talk to you about intimacy again, but I want to talk about it in a different light. I want to talk about the importance of understanding why there's such a lack of desire when it comes to intimacy and some of the things that hinder intimacy from functioning, right? And so a lot of times when we think about that, we know many people have a number of reasons why they may not be connecting through intimacy, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whatever type of intimacy that we're talking about. There are reasons why there's a lack of desire. And so we're talking even about the marriage bed on today. We want to talk about why there's such a lack of desire in the marriage bed and in relationships in general, right? So I want to talk about the physical intimacy on this particular show, right? And we want to talk about sexual desire, right? So sexual desire definitely starts, with our ears, right? It starts with what we hear. It starts with what's being said to us, right? It starts with us having that influence of somebody telling you how much they care, how much they're thinking about you. You're hearing somebody consistently speaking to you and sharing with you how they feel about you. So anytime we talk about, marriage in itself, we want to make sure that we're connecting through communication. And like I said a few weeks ago, how much communication connects to intimacy. It gets you in a proper mindset and it gets you connected to your spouse, right? And so it's so important for that, right? And so I want to talk about some things that can affect your lack of desire for intimacy on this week, because a lot of people don't realize or don't understand that there are a lot of personal or emotional issues that can hinder intimacy in your relationship, that can hinder intimacy when it comes to your sexual desire, that can hinder intimacy when it comes to you connecting with your spouse. All right, so I want to talk about some of these on today. All right, and so number one, the thing I want to talk about is definitely if you as a person have a poor self-image or a poor sexual self-image, then it's going to hinder you to connect with your spouse, right? Because a lot of times, in our culture, and sadly, whether you're in the church or not, people, they don't want to talk about their sexuality. So a lot of people feel bad about how they look, right? So they're ashamed of how they look. And so it's hard sometimes to perform sexually, or even, they have dread when it comes to their sex drive. Why? Because it's stealing or taking away any drive that they would have because of their being ashamed of their body, right? Feeling, maybe a certain part of their body is big or small, or, is, just, something that would not attract another person. And so a lot of people have a struggle when it comes to intimacy, physical intimacy, simply because of their poor self-image. So if you see yourself in a negative way and your image is not good, then I want to encourage you to first work on your self-image, right? Work on seeing yourself and saying, listen, I'm beautiful, I'm wonderful, God created me like this. You have to accept who you are. So as you accept who you are, it helps you to be able to deal with and connect with your spouse, being able to see yourself for who you are and to accept yourself for who you are, so that you're able to feel sensual and able to connect with physical intimacy. Listen, there are other people who have struggles with a fear of intimacy, right? They can have wounds that came from, past relationships that now they're trying to carry it into a present relationship. They may have issues where it's making it difficult for them to even desire intimacy or to desire oneness. Sometimes men may fear intimacy because maybe they think they're weak or unmanly, or maybe they can't, respond in the best way. So I want you to understand how important it is when you talk about intimacy. A lot of people really have a fear of intimacy, and these fears come because a lot of times their upbringing. These fears come from their relationships and things that have hindered them in the past, whether it's been, their relationship with their parents, the relationship with past girlfriends or boyfriends. These things now can hinder you and bring a fear of intimacy that will stop you from functioning into a place of building that desire to want to be intimate, to want to, create a place of intimacy, to want to become vulnerable. So becoming vulnerable will begin to break down the walls when it comes to a fear of intimacy. So learning how to move and maneuver in that capacity is very important, right? So I want to talk about a very serious one. Number one was poor self-image, right? Or how you see yourself, how you view yourself. Number two is the fear of intimacy, right? So that you're afraid, or you've had some wounds from the past. You don't want to become vulnerable again. Maybe you've been violated or had some issues. So it's difficult for you to even think about intimacy or desire intimacy, or even to want to become one with another. And so it's very important. When it comes to that, we want to talk about, childhood sexual abuse and molestation or rape. This is one of the number one things that can hinder intimacy in a relationship. And a lot of times people grow up and they've had some type of childhood sexual abuse, molestation, or rape in their life and in their past, but they don't want to talk about it. They bury it, right? And so they just dull the pain. They look at it as shame being associated to them. And they look at that as a previous sexual experience or physical activity, right? So now many victims, they become helpless, right? And so they fight their natural sex drive. You got to think about this, right? When you have something that has violated you and is outside of the rightful way that you're supposed to be touched or connected with, then there's going to be a struggle when it comes to you now being able to connect intimately, or be, touched intimately, or to get with a person intimately. Why? Because you've had some type of violation. But can I tell you that it's very important going into your marriage, going into your relationship, that you're open to talk about these things. Why? Because if you don't let your spouse know, your spouse may feel rejected. Your spouse may feel like they have, something's wrong with them. Why are you not responding? What is it that they're doing or not doing right? And so this can cultivate and add a lot of issues in your relationship if you're not willing to deal with those particulars, right? So I want to suggest to you, definitely, if you've had any type of childhood offense, whether it was sexual abuse, molestation, rape, sodomy, whatever it may have been, it's very important to get help. You need to talk to somebody. Make sure you get a counselor. Get somebody that can work with you, somebody that may be trustworthy, just to sit down and share with you, so that you can expose these emotions, so that you will be able to open yourself into a place of intimacy. It's very important, because in this day and time, many people have dealt with this, and because they've dealt with this particular area when it comes to having past issues of molestation or sexual abuse as a child, then it's going to be difficult for them to create real intimacy and to connect with you as a spouse. All right. So another thing that can hinder people from entering into intimacy sometimes is a lack of privacy, right? If you live in close quarters and you have, your parents around, or your children around, or, step children there, it's gonna be, likely to affect your intimacy. Why? Because some people are very private. They don't know how to respond. So when the other people are around, they don't know how to openly display affection, openly, be intimate with their spouse. So this can create a hindrance for those of you who feel like, you know what, I'm very private when it comes to my intimacy. So if you have a lack of privacy, sometimes this can hinder your intimacy or stop you from growing or building the level of intimacy that is required for you to have a healthy, physical, intimate interaction. Right? So I think this is very important, and we have to deal with it, because you're not only going to be intimate privately, you have to be intimate openly. And I told you the ways of being intimate, about the mental intimacy, right? The physical intimacy, the touch, right? The communication, all of these ways that we are interacting and being intimate, we need to be able to express that consistently and in the right environment. So you want to make sure that you're not afraid and that you only can express your intimacy in a private setting, all right? And that takes time. For those of you that may, struggle. A lot of times women are, more private. Women are the ones who feel like, I've had a lack of privacy, or especially if you have your parents living with you, your in-laws living with you, or, grown children, different things they may struggle with having that place of physical intimacy because of lack of privacy, all right? So it's very important to create privacy, create space, but then remember, you want to make sure that you're communicating and developing that intimacy outside of the bedroom through sharing I love you, creating mental intimacy, making sure, amen, that emotional intimacy is intact. So as you go into sexual or physical intimacy, it transitions you into the next place. All right. Other people struggle with intimacy based on guilt. Right? So it could be guilt. It could be sexual sins, right? Sexual sins can be, masturbation, promiscuity, premarital sex, with their spouse or before, they got married. Some people had abortions, so many different things, right? Before they met their spouse, maybe they were viewing pornography, so many different areas. So we have to understand some of these things can be seen as painful, right? And so even if they grew up in a strict household and sex was not talked about, or sex was talked about badly, right? So then now people begin to, feel guilty about these things. And then their natural sex drives or their thoughts or their desires, all of those things can cause them now to feel guilty, right? So then they don't have the proper desire they're supposed to have for their spouse. Why? Because maybe they believe they're wrong, believe they're kinky, maybe they're going to be sinful or weird if they desire their spouse. So this is very important, because we want people to understand that you should desire your spouse. You should develop intimacy. You should want to spend time in that manner with your spouse. That's a natural affection that God has given to each one of us, and we have the ability to utilize that, but we have to build up and create an atmosphere for intimacy for that fulfillment to come. So if you were, born or raised in a household where it was kind of shunned on or looked at badly or spoken about badly, you have to develop now new mindsets. You have to develop new thought patterns and processes to work with your spouse so that you all will be able to create a comfortable atmosphere for intimacy to come forth, right? Another reason why people have a lack of intimacy or a lack of desire is because of busyness. Sometimes you're just so busy, you're stressful, you have anxiety. And so you have to literally take a certain amount of time out. You have to, remember what I said a few weeks ago, we have to carve out time. So you have to literally say, this is the time for me and you to spend. This is time for us to relax. This is time for us to make sure we're in the right posture. You cannot force intimacy, remember. So making sure that you're not overstressed, Anxiety is there, busyness is there. You have to create those spaces so that you're able to calm yourself down, create an atmosphere, connect with one another, and so that it does not wear out your physical intimacy. One thing you see consistently with people who are overstressed, high anxiety, and busyness is that their sexual drive or physical intimacy becomes low. And so you have to monitor your level of busyness. You have to monitor your levels of stress. You have to monitor your levels of anxiety to make sure that these things don't overtake or infiltrate your physical intimacy, right? And so this is very important because we want to fight the lack of intimacy. This is why we're seeing so many problems and troubles in many marriages because of busyness, because of stress, because of anxiety. So this is something that you have to work on, you have to deal with, and you have to actually go back and make sure that you're attentive to it and you know specifically what it is that's taking place. All right, depression is also another one, okay? So I said poor self-image, number one. Fear of intimacy is number two. Childhood abuse is number three. Lack of pride is number four. There's some type of guilt from their childhood upbringing or past experiences. Then number 6 is going to be busyness, stress, or anxiety. Number 7 is depression, right? Sometimes people have, whether it's chronic depression, right? Depression begins to put everything in your life looking out of the wrong lens. So that means you really don't feel attractive. You don't want to be touched. You don't want to communicate. You just kind of lock yourself out in a zone. And so this is also something that maybe one of your partners may be experiencing when it comes to marital relationships. Maybe they've had a loss of a loved one in the family, or they've gone through some things with just clinical depression in their past. These are things that can hinder you from having intimacy or desire for intimacy. So because of that, you want to make sure that you are cognizant of that fact and that you're working, right, to make sure that you deal with that depression in whatever capacity is needed to make sure that it does not affect you from having that physical intimacy with your spouse, from having that connection with your spouse that is needed, right? And so we want to make sure that we understand that and we put ourselves in the proper alignment so that we're able to make sure that we're not leaving our spouse locked out due to depression. Okay, the next one is unforgiveness. Okay, and when we're talking about having a lack of intimacy, sometimes lack of intimacy develops in relationships because of unforgiveness, right? Deep grief or pain, bitterness, fear, anger, things that have happened. It could be negative emotions, right? It could have been something that stole the energy from you all's relationship, right? And so these emotions, if they're not, dealt with, they can be directed towards your spouse, right? And then they can affect your physical intimacy. So if there's any area that you have had, a deep wound from your spouse, then that unforgiveness can set in. This is why you have to deal with, the situations in your marriage. You have to deal with the grief, deal with the bitterness, deal with fear, deal with anger, deal with hate, anything that will come up as a negative emotion. Negative emotion creates negative energy, and then that negative energy flows down into your physical emotions, and those physical emotions now will hinder you from having a physical drive, right? A relational drive to want to be having physical intimacy with your spouse. Okay, so it's very, very important. All right, and then another area is just other outlets. So you invest large amount of times maybe into work or other people, social media, just everything else. It seems simple, but it could be a host of problems. If you're a person that's, a workaholic, or you just always have, your friends over, or different people doing things, whatever the case may be, you're fantasizing somewhere else in a different space. So you have to go back and look at what other outlets can steal or hinder my desire from being able to connect intimately with my spouse. So I need to make sure that I have myself in the proper alignment and proper agreement so that the fulfillment of what needs to come to pass in our relationship can happen, right? So whenever there is like a lack of desire, it definitely comes from your emotional issues, right? And so it's helpful for you to talk about it. You got to pray about it. You got to, seek out somebody that you can really share with us. If not your spouse, then a friend or a counselor who can definitely help you to face and deal with the problems in the atmosphere concerning you and your partner. This is major, because even in my book, I talk about this, and I want you to see this because my book called the Misconception of Love and Relationships, I talk about this because there are places in your relationship, right, where maybe you and your spouse are going to have to deal with this, where there's a lack of desire, where there's lack of intimacy, where there's lack of communication. And so you have to look at, how do we fix those areas? If you're going to have your spouse be your lifelong partner, surely you're going to go through phases in marriage, right? So you're going to have to know, how do we deal with those times where there's a lack of desire in our intimacy, where there's a lack of desire or lack of communication? You're changing, your bodies are changing. Women go through menopause and so many different areas. So we have to think about that, and I talk about it in this book because I believe that we need to deal with real issues when it comes to lack of intimacy. Many couples start to exist after a period of time because of lack of intimacy. And so it's up to us as couples to really fight and go back and make an investment to see how we can transition and change our lives and change our relationships for the better through, this book. This book, I tell you, it is changing people's lives. People are literally connecting. They're reading it. They're ordering it. I want to encourage you to go online. It's only $15. You can inbox us in the Deborah's Voice Talk Show. You can inbox us through Dewan Jackson on Facebook. You can go on my Instagram page through Jackson Dewan and inbox us there. You can call us at 251-301-7609. You can order it there, but it's only $15. You can do that through Cash App, which is DWANYJ, or you can do that also through PayPal, which is WOV960@yahoo.com. That's WOV960@yahoo.com. So there are many ways, but we just want you to get this in your hand. I'm telling you, it's going to be a blessing to your life. The Misconception of Love and Relationships. It tells all. It deals with every scope. It's an easy read. Many people are excited once they get it. They start to talk about it. They reach back out to us and say, how much of a blessing it is. Some of the chapters here talk about the test of love, talks about love versus lust. We talk about sex and marriage and intimacy, the true meaning of I love you. Come on, these are things that we need to talk about, right? How do I know if my man is in love with me? We got some deep stuff in this book, and I know it's going to bless you. It's going to help you. It's going to empower you, and it's going to, really push you to invest in your relationship. So listen, let's get back. Let me just give you a few more things that can happen as a result of lack of intimacy, right? So when there's a lack of non-sexual intimacy, right, that's another reason why intimacy can, start to be hindered, because why? No one is talking to you, right? No one's sharing with you how good you look. No one tells you, texts you, calls you, spends time with you. All of those things that we talked about before, that emotional intimacy is very, very important to develop physical intimacy, right? So you need to understand all of those aspects. Why? Because what's going to happen if you don't, then these things can happen. You'll have a lack of physical intimacy, right? And then lack of physical intimacy brings what? Dysfunction, right? It brings disappointment, right? It starts to make you feel, emotionally deprived, and then your sex drive literally is stolen, right? So we want to change this so that, sometimes even if you're being physically intimate, it can hinder you from even having, orgasms. It can hinder the male from having, to start having impotency. All kind of things happen as a result of lack of intimacy. intimacy. And so I want you all to read my book because I go into depth about it. I talk about it. When we're talking about physical intimacy, we understand that we have to make sure that we're having the proper techniques. Make sure we're going, before our spouse to make sure we're giving them what they want. Think about this. If you're in a particular thing, you don't want to do the same routine over and over and over and over and over. Why? Because what happens is then it becomes a lack of connection. There's no more connection. Why? Because you're not consistently and continually building that intimacy outside and inside the bedroom. So you want to make sure that you understand how important this is and where is, that you need to turn your interest to, right? So, a lack of understanding of what your spouse wants can hinder you in physical intimacy. If you're trying to give them something that doesn't attract them, you're trying to do something that they don't like, that's going to definitely turn them away from you, right? It's going to hinder you from connecting. It's going to hinder you from being able to develop, one with another, right? So you don't want to operate poorly. You want to find out what is it that they like? What attracts them? What is it that will help them to respond in intimacy physically? Okay, then you have times when there's a lack of trust or a lack of betrayal, right? A lack of trust or lack of betrayal also, can hinder intimacy, can hinder your level of intimacy, right? So if the spouse has abused that trust or, something has happened in between them where they feel as though they cannot trust you or they betrayed you, it's going to be difficult. You have to work through a process to build back up that intimacy. You have to work through a process to help one another to come back into that place where you're working and growing and being groomed to build that space back up. All right. So I want you to also understand, even if it's a lack of respect. Okay. This one is really serious because sometimes people coming from different backgrounds and they get married, there can be a lack of respect, so it can be difficult. Extremely difficult to desire intimacy with someone that does not show genuine love or consistency of genuine love, and then they continue to diminish your worth or your value or who you are. So that's very important. You want to make sure that you show the highest respect. Don't be selfish when it comes to intimacy. A lot of times when we're talking about building proper intimacy, we want to make sure that there is no selfishness in there. So you want to consider the other person above yourself. Sometimes that's hard, especially for men, but we want to make sure that we consider the other person above ourselves. Why? Because we want to make sure that there is no lack of intimacy in our relationship, right? So we're going to work hard on these to make sure that we continue to build intimacy, continue to build one with another, continue to break down these walls that are hindering and hurting marriages. I want to talk about this as well. Very important. You don't want to get to a state where you're just bored. When you're talking about physical intimacy, you don't want it to be boring, right? Sometimes, you won't get excited about doing the same thing every day over and over and over. So intimacy is no different, right? And then fear about what the other person may be feeling. If they express, boredom to you, then you need to be able to accept that. Be able to say, maybe it is boring. Maybe we do need to work on a different technique. Maybe we need to try something else. Maybe we need to work on our level of intimacy so that we can bond even better. I think it's very important when we understand how to work in our intimacy, we can have the best possible intimacy that God created for us on the earth. Sometimes intimacy can be hindered through physical issues, right? It can be hindered through physical issues, medical conditions, medicines, treatments, hormones, all of these things that can hinder us. Exhaustion. Some people have different situations in their body like endometriosis, these are areas and problems, that can cause, uncomfortable or painful intimacy. So we want to make sure that we understand, even there may be physical issues with your spouse. This book even talks about that. I want you to know my book is fully loaded. I even talk about that. You know, there are areas that you still have to work on intimacy with your spouse, no matter where you are, to make sure that you work to perfect that area and get it, you know, in the placement that it needs to be. So I'm excited that we had the opportunity to talk to you again today about this, you know, really understanding intimacy and the things that can hinder or cause a lack of desire for intimacy. I think that every time we come together and we learn more, we grow more, we mature more, it helps us to be better as a couple, better with our spouse, right? It puts us in the proper alignment and the proper perspective to be able to fulfill that which needs to be done. So I want you to do this for me. Make sure that you like this, subscribe to our page, hit the subscription button and the alert notification that lets you know every time Deborah's Voice is coming on, because I know that there's something that's going to be good for you. This is Dr. Dewan Jackson, and I want you to follow me. Follow me on YouTube at Apostle Dr. Dewan Jackson. Follow me on Facebook at Dewan Jackson. Follow me on Instagram at Jackson Dewan. I'm telling you, follow me, follow me, follow me. On this page, Deborah's Voice Talk Show, you're going to continue to be empowered. You're going to continue to be uplifted by consistent, great content that we have for our viewers. God bless you and have a great day.